Welcome back. We will restart our meeting. For the benefit of anyone who is watching this meeting live, the document that councillors have been considering is an options paper. It outlines feedback and considerations that have been made to date on wards, number of councillors, at large representation, community boards and rural wards. It offers three options for consideration. Option A is a change that includes at large representation. Option B is status quo, and option C introduces a rural ward. Option A introduces a rural advisory group. Does anyone like to start the discussion this morning?
Thanks, Chair. Last week in our workshop, when we were going through and discussing rural wards, we received information that a councillor who stands for a rural ward doesn't necessarily have to reside in a rural area of South Wairarapa. With regards to the option A, where there is a proposal to have two at-large councillors, do those councillors at large have to reside, or they can reside anywhere in South Wairarapa?
I think through YouTube they can reside anywhere. They just need to be nominated by two from South Wairarapa. So I believe at the last election we did have inquiries, people from Auckland, from outside the district.
Sure, it was the Featherston Community Board had a candidate from outside of, like, completely outside of the region. Yeah. They just need those in the region
To nominate them, right?
And this through YouTube, the same is true for all of those wards. It applies to the Māori ward, to the community wards, to the Greater Featherston Marlborough ward, and the at-large.
Thanks.
I think for me, I think about, when I think about these options, I think about what is the problem we're trying to solve with any change. And I think when I look at all three discussions that have been had, both in workshops and in the community, we hear quite often the rural voice, need for more of the rural voice. And so I think within this, a lot of what we're trying to fix is rural representation. But I also look around this table and I think of at least 4 councillors who live rurally, who are elected. And I think my concern for option C is a level of pressure that we put on a rural community, because what we're suggesting there is 3 rural wards. And I wonder, actually, given the workload of council and the workload of being a farmer, actually if the two aren't compatible, and that by introducing 3 rural wards, is that too much burden to put onto a community? And do we therefore find ourselves with unintended consequences, potentially unfilled seats, or no need for election because we only get one candidate for those seats rather than multiple? So there are some concerns that I have around option C, and some thought process that I give to all, like, what problem are we trying to solve with any of the options we would choose? So I saw some hands up, Councillor Bosley.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree. Option C for me is I just think we're too small to have the rural ward as such, and I think it would lead also, especially with option C, to dissatisfaction between some residents who might want to consider to be urban, but they just sit on the fringes of being rural. How do you and where do you start to draw that line between you're in the rural part of your ward, like we are actually a small, relatively, where centres are, we are geographically quite small in a big area. I think trying to have three, one from each, and also leads to the problem you just identified as well. Like, what if no one stands and you just get appointed? We saw that with the community boards this year. So the last training election was like, certainly in Greytown, there was no one really that stood against anybody else. That was kind of appointed. That would lead to certainly to conflicts and certainly conflicts of interest. And I think the establishment of a rural advisory group is something that we could look at doing now, because I think it's something that's needed. I know that Martin Council have one already. And it sort of feels that then we are taking those concerns you just outlined on board immediately. We'd rather have to wait for an election to do so. The status quo, obviously, not really thrilled with that, because I think for me as well, I would have been quite vocal about this as well, is that I think community boards should go. Community boards were established mainly in 1989 when the TAs when the councils were amalgamated to serve a purpose of still representing those smaller communities. They still have a voice within that new formation of the councils. I think they've served their purpose. The average area that a community board was set to service was a community board for a population of about 9,000. That's pretty much the collective total that we've got. So, and it was also to cover those smaller isolated communities, like rural communities, who did have a voice in the, in their sort of city area, right? Where we have that. So it's almost a degree of over-representation within the wards, and you've got 3 councillors from a ward, and then you've got 4 community board members, on top of that. And I think the establishment maybe of ratepayers associations would be an alternative to that. And that could be something the council looked at, like say, and pulling a number out of thin air here, that we give them 10 grand to cover their setup costs, secretarial costs, or whatever it might be, that they would have a greater voice in terms of representing to council what their community wanted that way than we do with the community boards. I think we're just too small for the rural boards. So just look at my hand scribbled notes on that last 15-minute section. Make sure I haven't missed anything. I think that's pretty much where I landed, but I think sort of opinions rather than questions.
Thank you. So I think you make some good points. The other thing about the rural advisory group is to note that that sits outside of the formal representation review, which is a plus. And I think, to my mind, it's a plus. The other thing is it does address some of the issues that you raised earlier around those standing, being able to actually be from any area. A rural advisory group needs nominations and appointments. So it does have a better sort of target of making sure it's people on it to advocate for that.
Sorry, Chair, I did actually forget one little bit. Sorry.
One closing point.
One closing point, which is the at large, which I think is we are too big an area to have councillors at large, and we are already pretty much councillors at large anyway. As you pointed out, why we may be elected for the Greytown Festival Mountain Awards, we actually we are considered the entire region. And I think for a specific council to stand as the at-large with such a big area to get around, also for the same sort of remuneration that we get as well, as a big ask. And I don't think they could really represent a community strong enough as we do now. So I feel like an at-large is kind of like we're already in that space. What extra, like what is that problem that we're trying to solve? I don't know if there is one there. Sorry.
Councillor Owens.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I endorse exactly what sort of Bosley has been saying, only to go so far as to say certainly at large, I don't believe this would work functionally, but we're talking about representing. One of the reasons we have ward boundaries is to get a nice even split of representation across the South Wairarapa, and by having ward elected councillors, of course, we do see that even representation. The gap has been in that rural voice to a large extent in terms of our farming community, not so much our livestock community, which I'm part of that, but our farming community to have a strong voice around the table. And I really support the rural advisory, the establishment of a rural advisory group. Now, That may be a group set up outside council. But I'd quite like to take it to the next step and actually have it a group that is formed to a large extent or managed by council in terms of getting a representation from the rural community rather than leaving it to the rural community to look at their own appointments and sit outside council without any mandate or any representation.
Seeing, my understanding is that council would manage the nomination and formation process for an advisory group.
Through you, Madam Chair. Just the point of the councillors, while we could go out and consult on this, obviously this is not part of an election review. There's no, we can establish this whenever the council wants to. There is specific documentation we would come to the council with, such as the terms of reference for it, how nominations or the process might occur, its purpose. So what is the purpose of it, of which there could be many or reduced, whatever the council wanted. That would happen in the background. And as I said, while we can consult on this during the process to acknowledge that to the community, that the council believes that this is an important group to consult with. Once that's happened, we can, and if it's endorsed or not by the council, we can get underway with that work straight away.
So the reference that I'm making to the Rural Advisory Group is that I recall we had a water race committee, for instance, that were representatives of that water race network some years ago. So it was managed by council. The chair was appointed by council and it reported to council. So I'm sure a Rural Advisory Group could be worked under the same structure. In terms of option A, of course, is one that I'm very keen on. Community boards, if I go back to community boards, they served a purpose in those early days, as Councillor Bosley's alluded us to, but now are they fit to purpose? And I've always believed of recent times, and even going back to the last election, that if we don't embrace and perhaps give community boards greater levels of responsibility, we don't need them any longer. And with 3 councillors in each ward representing the ward as for a small population, I think that's adequate. We're connected. I know us 3 in Featherston are very much connected with our communities. I know that you are in Clayton, and I certainly know the Martinborough ones are as well. So really, that's the sort of over-representation viewpoint. Not sure about the at-large, and I take up your point as well. I think at-large probably is something that we need to perhaps, I don't know if that needs to be included.
I'm going to throw in an alternate opinion just before we go to the next in terms of at large. I'm quite interested in exploring the at large further. We've seen whilst the early consultation pool was quite small, we have seen solid interest in at large nominees and a change there. I think that currently the only member of this council elected at large is the mayor, and I think 2 at-large councillors would provide some good balance to that. I think there is a perception in the community that because we are elected by ward, that we provide a bias or a favouritism to our ward at this table, despite the fact that we are elected at a district level. So I think getting some at-large representation in gives a bit of a balance to that perception as well. So I support an at-large move, or certainly consultating on an at-large move. Community boards, I don't think at the moment community boards are necessarily set up to succeed. I don't think that those on the boards have been given the tools to have a very clear understanding of their purpose. And I think we see that across the 3 towns where the 3 boards have filled different gaps in their community, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in terms of filling the need that you find. but I think that doesn't necessarily set them up for success. So I concur with councillor Oles. I think they need to be reviewed in terms of what are their purpose, how do they succeed, what are they here for, and if we can't build them up, then I think we need to look at are they fit for purpose? Do they need to exist here? Any further comments?
Excuse me, I thought I was next. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in terms of the option 3 with the rural wards, I don't really agree with that either. I was certainly looking at that initially and looking at the representation of the I think that it's a better way to go as the rural advisory group to achieve that. Yes, and also in terms of, we obviously haven't been able to come up with the electoral population data for that, but I think it would probably be quite variable between the different wards. Maybe not quite fair in that respect too. So at large, I see I don't think that necessarily gets around the perception of orientation towards a particular area, because those people are still presumably going to be residing in one of the areas. I don't see that as a very big criticism. I still think that the councillors tend to take representation of the whole area, even though they might know a bit more about their own area, but I think that balances out. But and at the large large approach, I don't really see that is actually necessary at all in that respect. So with the community boards, I do think that needs review. I personally like to see some community representation, and I don't really see the business association, as has been discussed, would actually fill that need, because a lot of ratepayers aren't in the business community. But I quite like it, if we explored, the aspect like the advisory board of the rural, for the rural area, if there's some aspect that could be done, something like that too, with the community representation. And certainly with the rural advisory group, I'd very much like to see that it was appointed with the required skills, knowledge in that too, that sometimes with the voting system, you don't necessarily get that. So I'd certainly like to see the appointment position taking and account the advice from Federation Farmers and things like that, to make sure that we've got the right kind of representation on that. No views.
So just to be really, really clear, any advice, so the representation review looks at elected positions. So any advisory groups, whether the rural or for any particular sector of our community, they can easily be, they can be established, but they do sit outside of this consultation because this is specific to elected positions.
Yes.
And just also a reminder that we're trying to get to a proposal to put to our community to feedback on. So it's very important that we have our views and our position on what's included, but ultimately it's something that we're going to push back to our community for their feedback and get to a final proposal. Councillor Gray, and then
Thank you. I do very much like what you were saying with the community boards, that at the moment I don't feel that they aren't set up to succeed. But speaking as somebody who does sit on the Featherston Community Board, I do see people of Featherston accessing our community board a lot more than they ever come to council. I think having that facility or that interface is valuable. So whilst I think currently they're not functioning the way that they should be, there is a lot of potential there. And I think that is right that we take that back to the community and just consult on whether that's something that they would like to continue or not. In regards to the rural ward, I wonder if when we talk about a rural ward, the people who have been agitating the strongest for a rural ward meaningfully are actually wanting a farmers ward, because there's a lot of different people who live rurally who have different needs or circumstances or situations, and I don't know that a rural ward would necessarily cover their needs. Whereas a rural advisory group, you're more likely to get a broader range of opinions. So I wouldn't be supportive of a rural ward specifically, but another mechanism for representation for that group, I think is fantastic. And then, yeah, I am actually quite in favour of having at-large councillors, mostly because we have had a lot of discussions around potential amalgamation of Wairarapa councils in the future. And I think having councillors who speak for the district at large formally, as in they're selected and elected by the district at large, I think that brings a different strength of representation to any sort of future structure that the council might be investigating. Yeah, so that's.
Just a question for the team. Looking at representation proposals from other councils that are starting to come through, I noted in one who have already had at large and ward joint. They noted in their information about who would get to vote for which candidates, that if you have both wards and at large, those on the Māori roll will get to vote for the mayor, the Māori candidate, and the at large candidates as well. So by introducing at large candidates, we would actually be broadening the voting ability for those on the Māori roll, because they would get choices rather than just two.
Interesting.
Thank you.
So this was a topic that came up in debate quite often when we talked with the Māori Standing Committee about a Māori award, was the fact that currently on the general roll people get 4 votes, 3 for a councillor and 1 for the mayor, and moving to a Māori ward, those on the Māori electoral roll would only get 2 votes, 1 for the Māori ward and 1 for the mayor. So at large is an option to allow for a little bit more equality across those two votes.
Good point.
Thank you. Any final comments before we move? We'll go Councillor Elams, Councillor Bosley, and then we'll look at our recommendations.
Do you have some comments to make?
No.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to add, and I'm biased towards community boards because I was on the Martinborough Community Board for the previous triennium and I'm still involved with Martinborough Community Board. Certainly from a Martinborough perspective, the Community Board has, not only in the times that I've been involved, but previously, I think provided a strong voice from the community through the Community Board coming up onto the council table. And I feel that agree that perhaps our community boards are not working as well as they could be, but that could be tweaked and could be refined. But I also feel that whether we have 3 ward councillors or we go under option A to 2 ward councillors and 2 councillors at large, being a conduit for the information from the community to the council table would be harder, because if there is not a community board layer below the councillors, later on we're going to have a conversation about what our community boards are doing in this agenda, and I'll share what the Martinborough Community Board is involved in, and I'm just shaking my head thinking about all those things that they are doing at the moment, which is over and above what I have the time and ability to do.
Councillor Bosley, final words, and anyone.
Yeah, so harping on about community boards is, of 67 councils, only 40 have community boards, and they're reducing their numbers, they're getting rid of them. They are expensive to run. I campaigned on actually giving community boards more power. I thought they needed to be a stronger voice in the community. Now that I've been on one, the thought of giving a community board more power terrifies me. And I don't think it's just to do with being given more instruction in their governance role and what they're about. I think the idea of a community board was fundamentally probably a good one. But I think the mechanics of it and who ends up there could be is problematic at best. And I think that, therein lies the problem for me, really.
Thank you.
Sorry, one other thing is with the Rural Advisory Group, you could have councillors appointed to it, though, right? Two councillors will be appointed to it.
I may be wrong, but what I'm hearing is a leaning towards option A.
Correct.
But with some
Tweaks.
unresolved debate around whether we consult on no community board or whether we just consult on keeping community boards. I feel like that's probably currently the biggest sticking point. I feel like there's some who are very pro and some who are and some who are very what is the best way to move option A as it is and see where it leads?
Madam Chair, can I just make a comment? Because one of the things that we have got, we haven't got an option or even across the board here is a recommendation that we seek out guidance from the Community Resident Ratepayers Association.
They're not elected.
Well, no, I realise that, but I mean, we've done away, if we do away with community boards, then where's the community, apart from us councillors, where's the community going to see that their voice is going to be heard? What body is going to be set up to replace it? I think it's really important that we, when we send the message out to community board to talk about community boards, whether or not we continue down the same path, but also suggest some other alternatives such as residents.
Yeah.
I think it's really
Correct me if I'm wrong, the really clear definition is that a residents and ratepayers association or similar comes up from
That's
community.
correct,
It's
yeah.
community driven, it's community organised, but
Exactly.
Through you, Madam Chair, with the consultation document that we'll put out, there'll also be supporting information. And I think in there, the council today has had a really good discussion about local representation and what that may look like, whether that be elected or not. And what we can do is we can include those options and tell people, talk about business association, residents associations and so forth. We could also talk about if community boards were kept in their current form or in a slightly revised form, which might be delineation of decision making or funding, whatever support that might be for them. So what I guess I could assure you is that we can look at the range of local representation and how it might look in the consultation and information. In terms of the decision-making process, as you quite rightly pointed out, it sounds like you have identified in areas that you've agreed to, apart from the community boards. That's essentially how we got to this paper to bring to you, because it seemed like a mixed view. In terms of your decision-making, you just separate that out as a separate decision, and just by show of hands or however you want to manage that, decide on the option that you'd like us to go with.
fabulous, thank you for that. So we'll start with, do I have a mover to receive the representation review report? Councillor Gray, and supported by Councillor Elams. All those in favour, please say
Aye.
Aye.
all those against, please say no. It's carried. Thank you. I am going to move that we agree to move forward on option A, the development of the initial proposal and consultation document. But okay, so we've got a second there. So the things to be aware is that that's in its full as it's written. If this fails, we can then, that's open to. So we're moving it as it stands. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those against, please say no. Sorry, is that okay?
All there.
Okay,
Yeah.
Really unhappy about the at-large, but I will say aye.
okay, so we can have our ayes again, please,
Aye.
and our noes.
No, so am I.
You're an aye, okay, so that was you. Thank you, everyone. Motion is carried. And then we've got two that we'll take together. Note that the initial proposal and consultation document will be presented at the next strategy working committee on 31 July for approval. And acknowledge the timeframe required to meet the statutory timeframe as noted in the report. And that's noting that 31 July is in fact our
Yeah, yeah.
do I have a mover for those two? That's Gray, seconded by Violet. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, no. Motion is also carried. Fantastic, good work, everyone. We move directly to item B, to the adoption of the Wairarapa Class 4 Gambling and Standalone Tier B policy. If it seems familiar to you, it is because this will be about the third or fourth time this has come across this table, and I look forward to reaching a question. Okay. Team, take it away.
Well said.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. This has been seen before. So 3 things to note in the report. The first is that Masterton, we have wonderful Steve from Masterton here online as well, have adopted this policy. So Masterton adopted this policy with an amendment to clause 6.1. So the policy has changed a little bit since you saw it last time. There have been a few amendments put in there for Masterton, so I would recommend take a moment to read those. But it has been adopted by Masterton. It is now coming to South Wairarapa for adoption, and following today, if all goes well, it will go to Carterton for adoption at the end of July. The second thing I'd like to point out is there is answers to the questions that were raised the last time this policy came to the council table. So there were a number of debates and discussions, and we have spent some time over the last few months just clarifying those for you. So there are some answers to those key themes that were raised last time in the report. The third thing to note is we have got a couple of options around today. We are very much going for adoption for this policy, and our recommendation based on the Wairarapa Policy Working Group and the work that they have done over probably close to 2 years is to adopt the policy as it stands. But you have got an option there should you wish to debate it. And can I just see if Steph would like to?
Yeah, any further words, Steph?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm just here in support, as I understand there was some discussion at your past meeting, particularly in relation to Masterton's clause. I think what I would draw your attention to is that Masterton did seek that different policy position from the outset, and that was due to some of the specific issues and risk of gambling harm that was identified in the social impact assessment for Masterton. We didn't see that same risk for either South Wairarapa or Carterton. And in fact, on some of those metrics, South Wairarapa of the Wairarapa districts was actually at lowest risk. But despite that, the proposed policy does include that additional protection that would ensure that venues cannot relocate to most deprived areas of your district. That was the position that you consulted on, and you did receive majority support for that, and it does align with those social impact findings. There is, as Nikki has highlighted, that alternative option in there for you today to align with Masterton. I think I would just bring your attention, if you did consider or debate that option, is that you did, as part of your consultation, include an option for a more restrictive venue relocation for South Wairarapa, but it wasn't supported by the majority of your submitters, and it wasn't recommended by the Wairarapa Policy Working Group. So just be mindful of sort of consulting on a preferred position, receiving support for that, and then deciding at this stage to take a different path, just how that might be sort of perceived potentially by your community. But just here, yeah, if there's any questions specifically in relation to Masterton or anything else that we can support with, as we've been working on this policy together across the 3 councils.
Steph. So the really kind of key concern of the table at previous times this company has come to us has been this relocation of of establishments from outside of the area here. And this report and what I heard Steph say was a confirmation that that cannot happen. In terms of there is a cap in our most deprived areas are protected.
So through you, Chair, what this paper outlines is that the policy is currently doing its job. So that we have a cap, we are seeing a reduction in gambling especially across South Wairarapa as well. The amount of money spent on gambling is lower than the national average. We have seen a reduction in the number of gambling venues since the cap's been put in place. So the Wairarapa Policy Working Group believes that the policy as it stands is doing the job it needs. The impact statements that came through that the Policy Working Group looked at as part of the work done here was around the fact that Masterton is a very different demographic to South Wairarapa and has some real areas of concern and need, and hence that is why the Masterton have put in that relocation clause for Masterton. Ours aligns with Carterton because our demographics align with Carterton, and that is why the policy reflects that. There is, as Steph said, an option to tighten that so that if we wanted to align with Masterton, there would be absolutely no relocation. So if anything happened to any of our gambling venues and they had to close for whatever reason, that would be it, which is quite a restrictive
That means if they burnt down, if there was a flood and they just needed to do repairs to their building, they can't have a temporary venue, they just won't.
There's a little bit in, so that is related to 6.1. So I'd highlight and have a quick look at 6.1, which is the Masterton clause around the relocation.
We got any questions for Steph, Nikki, or
I think 6.1F sort of covers that, doesn't it? 6.1.F.
One only goes to E.
Then painted in red.
F.
Yeah, first scroll down first.
Council will only grant consent in circumstances where an existing site requires remedial work due to an adverse event such as fire, flood, and earthquake.
This is the one.
That's the Masterton and South Wairarapa.
On Masterton at this stage. So you would need to move to change the policy to align with Masterton instead of aligning with Masterton.
the only problem with moving to align with Masterton is that we didn't consult on it, and the consultation that we did do received majority support. So that's the tension that we had. Councillor Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the concerns that were raised around the table have now been abated to a large extent, simply by the obviously that relocation of venues was of concern around this table. And from memory, I think that was probably the main concern, was it not?
It was, yeah.
We're pretty much satisfied that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm comfortable to move that we adopt this. Madam Chair.
Okay, well, if we've got any further comment?
Just similarly, because I was really worried about that relocation aspect, and so that's covered my concerns.
Gonna take Ever the Optimist, I'm gonna take them all together.
Oh, increase.
Future, just to be clear that we are adopting the policy
As it stands.
As it stands, yeah.
it's recommended by the Wairarapa Policy Working Group.
Yep. That's what I've moved.
Do I have a mover? Well, I have a mover, Councillor Olds, and we're moving all 4 recommendations that we received the report, that we agreed the Wairarapa Policy Working Group's recommended option for the Wairarapa Class 4 gambling and Stillo TAB policy, the option 1, that we adopt the Wairarapa Class 4 gambling and Stillo TAB venues policy in attachment 1, including any changes to the attached policy by Carterton.
Yes, so through you, Chair, just being aware that obviously there was discussion here to change, and Masterton made a change to the clause, so we added that just in case there is additional discussion at Carterton following the they will be the final council to adopt the
To
policy.
reflect an amended venue relocation policy for Bear Council and delegate authority to the strategy working committee, chairperson and chief executive to approve minor edits that don't change the intent of the content prior to publication. The Wairarapa Class 4 gambling and standalone TME policy. So we've got councillor Oles moving and a seconder. Yes.
My question is, with changes to the policy if there are any changes to the policy by Carterton, I've got no qualms about what we're doing now, but if there are any changes to the policy that Carterton put up, can we just be encircled in that, not to make any changes, but just so, for our information.
Yeah, we're involved, yeah.
Thanks.
We need to note that. Fantastic. So
I will second.
as well. Fantastic. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Motion is carried.
Hey, well done.
Well done. And a few others, yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Vicky.
We are running ahead on time. We're running ahead of time.
When did Steve start working for Marsden?
So we are running a bit ahead of time, so we'll just give the leads team a moment.
Taking over Karen Youngs.
Read the. Are they coming online?
They're coming on. We can. Yeah, we'll introduce the item, and hopefully Matt will be with us by then. So we are moving to, our final decision paper for the section of the morning. Item B3, Wairarapa Economic Development Strategy Work Program for the financial year 2024-2025. The operating model and the memorandum of understanding for the financial year 2024-2027. We're going to get Janice to take us through the report anyway, and then we'll get Matt to speak to it. So Janice.
I'm going to have to defer this, because I wasn't at the meeting when this went through. You've been on it, or we really embrace it. Because Martin was
We're really fabulous. Matt, we have just introduced the topic. We have a large number of recommendations to be moved. If you could take us through the paper, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll keep it quite short, assuming the paper has been read. So WEDS has been working as a forum and Wellington NZ as the PMO, together with the three councils, the three Wairarapa District Council chief executives and mayors as representatives on the WEDS forum over the last few months, looking at what are the priorities for WEDS for the coming financial year, which is the one starting now in July. What were the lessons learned from the model that WEDS has been operating under, and what memorandum of understanding do we need in place between the three councils and Wellington NZ, together as four parties delivering economic development for the Wairarapa. And that's what has been presented in the paper. So just as reminders, there were 6 priorities identified for WEDS this year. And they are water resilience, transport resilience, food and fiber, workforce, tourism, dark skies, and Maori economic development. And after some analysis, WEDS is best placed to deliver and take the lead on 3 of, or support leads on 3 of those areas, and that's water resilience, food and fiber, and workforce development. So that's the focused work program, which is proposed for this financial year. In terms of the operating model, we have looked at how to right-size the operating model, including governance, based on the size of the WEDS work program and resources. And what we are recommending is a steering group focused on economic development skills, with representatives from the three councils through their economic development officers, from iwi, and then from economic development people with expertise in those focus areas that I just named, as well as connectors such as with the central government opportunities, for example. The memorandum of understanding reflects that commitment to jointly working together with the three councils and with Wellington NZ to deliver the work program for the year under the operating model. And for South Wairarapa District Council, it remains at the same level of financial commitment as for the last few years that we have been operating under. I'll leave it here as a summary.
Matt, I will open discussion by saying that I'm quite comfortable with recommendations, particularly 2 through 5, that are around the prioritisation workshop. I took part in that while I was acting mayor, and I've said before at this table that it was a very well-run workshop. And I'm quite had discussion and influence over the prioritisation and workflow that came out of that. So I'm quite comfortable there. My only real question, perhaps for our own staff, is agreeing the memorandum of understanding for 2024 through 2027, given that we are heading into an annual plan year rather than an LTP year, it feels a little uncomfortable for me. Are you able to offer any guidance or advice on that?
I think it is, we're heading into the LTP, so we'd have the 2 years for the LTP, and then obviously we would hit the cycle normally again. At the moment, we have only got funding agreed for 1 year, not for 3 years like the other councils. So I am concerned that you're locking in a 3-year funding envelope when we haven't actually consulted on these 2 and 3 at this point for us, which is different to the other councils in the group.
Are we in a position where we can alter recommendation 11 to be for 1 July 2024 through to 30 June 2025, and then look at the remaining years as part of the LTP? Is that something we can do?
I suppose so. My feeling is that, well, the other 2 councils have obviously under different circumstances as far as the LTP cycle are concerned, which I understand, have approved the memorandum of understanding as it is. I do understand your particular predicament. Would it be possible to perhaps retain the dates as they are, but make the final 2 years conditional to LTP approval from South Wairarapa District Council at the end of June 2025?
So
Have you downloaded the material? If you're suggesting is that you adopt for 24-25 with an in-principle agreement to 25 through 27 based on consultation for the long-term plan.
That is what I'm suggesting, yes.
Yeah. So it's not a firm agreement, it's an in-principle agreement that's subject to any consultation that falls through for our LTP. So that means we would split 11 into
2 parts.
agreements for 24-25, and then a further recommendation to agree in principle 1 July 2025 through to 30 June 2027.
Yes, and I'm certainly reluctant to lock us into anything outside of and that's not saying that we don't, that I have any issue with working with WEDS or continuing our agreement. That's just simply saying that we as a council haven't consulted or locked in our budgets for 3 years, I don't feel comfortable locking and spend past what we've looked at.
Yes.
But I'm open to being told I'm wrong.
You know, I know.
No, it makes
Yeah, I
sense.
agree.
Yeah, I don't see how we can.
We're likely to get representations next year as well from people like Distillation Wairarapa, who may be a funding cut situation because of Marsden's position. So I think, tourism is vital for this area, it might be not for them.
Hold on, can we just stop? Are we still at 1, 2, 3? We're still at quarter? Yes. Yeah, because that's 6 members. Cool. No, I just suddenly thought councillor Elam. Yeah, I get that. Carry on, as you were. So, Kieran, any further comments?
I think that move, that amendment to 11. Yeah, agree, with that split. 12 month commitment, beyond 12 months, then obviously it's something we need to consult on in terms of.
So, and this principle decision.
In principle decision, absolutely right. I mean, I guess I'm always concerned about these organisations such as Reds with assurities coming from councils about their future funding programs, because that's really critical to their workload. But I think we have to consider, I guess, what we can do in an annual plan, enhanced annual plan year as against an LTP year. So you're right, we haven't consulted on this. We need to consult on it. But in principle, we would agree that the funding stream would go through to 2027. So that's my.
Totally agree with you.
Have we got any comment or debate on any of the other recommendations outside of 11? No, we're all quite comfortable. Yeah. Well, going to get really optimistic and rolling on from our past success. We're looking for a mover for all of.
I think, do we need to do an amendment to it?
I think you need to do an amendment.
And then,
So I will move a formal agreement to 11 to read agreed memorandum of understanding for 1 July 2024 to 30 June 2025, including funding provision, and agree in principle for 1 July 2025 to 30 June 2027.
Subject to approval.
Subject to approval. Or just in principle.
I just think in principle,
Just in
you
principle.
may decide to consult on it.
Agree in principle. The memorandum of understanding for 1 July 2025 to 30 June 2027. Okay.
So is that two?
I think just one form. I think it's 11B. 11A is to agree.
25.
MOU
2025.
11B in principle, the MOU in principle for 1 July 25 through to 3rd June 27.
Yep, thank you. So I'm moving that. Do I have support, please? Thank you, councillor Bosley. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, no. The amendment is carried and now.
In the substantive, you can move all.
You now can move that. So do I have a mover to move all 14 recommendations? Councillor Macaulay. Do I have a second, please? Violet. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, no. Motions are carried.
Fantastic.
Next.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Oh, no, I just said thank you. All of the motions with the amended 11 passed.
Mhm.
And
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Kia ora.
thank you. We are still ahead of time. There was a proposed break after the weeds, but we are quite early and I think slightly too early for lunch. So I am suggesting that we move on to item C1, action items, please. We got any updates or equally any questions from councillors?
So it's not an update, but a suggestion. Now conversation with 407 for the looking at options for a district joint committee. So we haven't had any traction so far with this. But the suggestion was to take it to the next combined district council and to submit a paper presentation for that, which I would be happy to do if we have support for that.
Perfect. Seems like a pretty good update to me.
All good.
Any other updates? Or questions on any of the items?
Could I, through the chair, ask if 516 would be closed? There has been work done in terms of safety, in terms of share the road signs and the work that was done around the road edges. I'm not sure what else it seems to do in this space. It isn't currently in our work programme for the next 12 months, so this is just going to sit here.
Oh, it's
So I would ask that that be closed.
the only, sorry, Janice, the only cautionary note I put on there is that the right-hand side of Underhill Road still poses a risk in terms of for the trail rise, so effectively that road. I think there is a future plan, obviously, with an off-road trail up past there. So if we take it off, it'll probably be reintroduced at some later stage anyway.
And that could come back through the trails route.
Yes.
You're part of.
Yeah.
It is a relatively common feature of cycle trails that at some point they hit the road and then go back onto the trail.
Yeah. Yes, no, that's great, but I'm comfortable for that to go.
Just to note, action 118, we are treating as action. I know there have been a couple of presentations and communication with elected members by the ratepayer in this case, but we have put at least 2 proposals to them and they don't want to take either of them, so. Still. 118. I would also ask that 123 be closed. We were leaving this open because we were putting signs from 1 July. The funding has been approved into the new financial year, so that will take place for Freedom Camping. Again, it's going to stay here and it's a work in progress for the team anyway.
Who's fair?
Has there been any further progress on 134? Being middle of winter and
just take a comment from Stefan, but there is a workshop with Wellington Water School Water team being prepared to put to you all around stormwater management. So I will leave that one there for now until that workshop takes place.
Through you, Chair. Regards to 126 regarding Payne Farm, is there just going to be, now that your report is brief has come through? Oh no, your report specific to the finance as opposed to.
Yeah, no, 126 will remain.
Sure, thank you.
Just for councillors on 134 Brandon Street, we have got a program of work in relation to some of the specific trouble spots in that street, which we will be addressing. But yes, the C is correct. The larger picture of how we deal with stormwater through the district, and particularly in Peterson, is the subject of a future workshop. Thanks.
Thank you.
One question and one comment. Do we have a timeline for that?
The program to work on hotspots in the district, no, not yet. We've started in Daniel Street. You may have seen those of you who've been in Featherston recently, we've replaced the culvert and taken out some old stormwater drains down Daniel Street and reformed the heavy drains. Because we were dealing with a greater overflow of the solution from Lake Super Valley. And now we'll observe what happens later in the street towards the main drain of the street. So ultimately where all the trees are. And we're kind of in that position in a number of streets where we're looking at engineered solution to that. But we're still unsure of whether we'll move that problem down the street or somewhere else. And so we're going through an assessment period at the moment in relation to that.
Heartening to hear in other forums, for example, the Wairarapa Water Resilience Strategy Group, that there is quite a broad focus and that Featherston in particular keeps coming up in conversation. So it would be nice to think that in the future, we will be taking a much more collaborative view of these sorts of issues rather than it just being this one group. So.
Thanks, Chair. Stefan, with regards to that workshop you're talking about on stormwater, is that part of that piece of work which council funded from the EAP on a stormwater and flooding study across the whole district?
Yeah, so the object of the workshop is to have councillors have this table in really good shape for decisions that you'll need to make in relation to stormwater in the LTP. Because stormwater, as you know, has been the poor cousin after safe drinking water and the proper investment levels we've needed in treated wastewater. So now your attention is required in a certain way on stormwater. But in order to do that, we're gonna have to really, give you a lot more information and help you navigate some of the issues from stormwater, because it hasn't really been something that you've really focused on heavily. But now you'll need to, I think, coming into the LTP. So that was a very, very good specialist in Wellington that's going to come over and take you right from A to Z to help us understand what the investment will sort of need to look like in the LTP. Now, as part of that, obviously the modelling and the modelling work that Wellington Water have done and Greater Wellington have done is a really important part of understanding the catchment level challenges that we've got and how they're looking over time. So I think it's going to be it'll be challenging, but it's going to be a really exciting piece of work for us to be involved.
Cool. Thanks.
Any
Looking forward to it.
we're suggesting that we do take a.
Just before you move on, Action 190 relates to the Community Wellbeing Fund. It's only still open because of number 5, which was the Chief Executive report back on funds used in due course. This could be open for 2 years if we leave it open. I would recommend that we close it at this point. But I would also just like to note for the table that the money that we allocated to the water services plan, I may need to allocate some of that for the infrastructure strategy as part of the LTP, because we've now moved Robin into the lead for local water Stonewell, which means I need an additional resource for the infrastructure strategy. So I may need to divert a small amount of funds to make sure that gets done appropriately for the LTP. But that will come back in the report, and once we have a plan for moving to local water Stonewell, which obviously Councillor Olds will update you on further later, we'll be bringing those reports back through council as we move forward. So I'd ask that 190 be closed, because otherwise it's going to sit here for up to 2 years while we work through the Community Wellbeing Fund.
Any final questions? I'm going to suggest we do
Really lunch really start back.
really actually start back.
Excellent.
So, 25 minutes.
Quarter past 12.
As well,
Mm.
we'll adjourn for lunch and return at 12:15. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.